Okay, guys, don't leave because we know that this is the issue that is uppermost on your minds. You can save a lot of money by having these guys give you some real advice on cybersecurity. I thought it was very telling that John Stumpf said cybersecurity meetings are the one thing that he does not miss. So we know you have a lot of concerns about it. We're short on time. We're going to jump right in. But I did want to emphasize that this is your session. And if you have questions, please start thinking about them. And I'll turn to the audience pretty early. So let's start. Kevin, I'm going to start with you. Kevin Mandia. Kevin's claim to fame nationally was being behind a report that they put out that linked the attacks coming out of China to the Chinese military. Got a lot of attention, and he's very well positioned to speak to geopolitical issues. So we've been talking about this, you and I, and you're seeing some really interesting trends on the Russia front that have to do with geopolitical moves. Explain.
Well, I'm not sure if I can link it to geopolitical moves or not. I'm a cyber nerd, but it sounds more interesting if you can. It took me about 22 years of responding to computer security breaches before I realized that there might be a link between the breaches we were responding to in cyberspace and geopolitical conditions in the world. What I did witness is in 2014, rules of engagement that I've commonly observed between us and Russia in cyberspace changed somehow, meaning it used to be every time we responded to a breach and we would have attributed that breach to the Russian government, they would go away. If we caught them breaching a .military organization or .gov or .edu, they knew we were on to them, they would evaporate, and we wouldn't be able to collect intelligence. For the first time in my career, we're responding to breaches that I would attribute to Russian government, it's either government condoned or government conducted actions, but they're not going away when we respond. They're staying and coming back day after day after day. And it's a small tweak in the rules of engagement, but after 20 years of responding, and every time we responded, they would cease activities. To see them not cease activities, you start looking at, well, why is that? Could it be because NATO forces are getting closer to Russia from time to time?
What do you think?
Conditions Ukraine. See, I don't have to think about that stuff. I'm a cybersecurity guy. I just respond to breaches. But somewhere out there, there's people that get paid a lot of money to figure that stuff out. So.
But you're seeing potential correlation between what you see on the ground?
2014, without a doubt, rules of engagement, even though they're not written down, in my opinion, the rules of engagement somehow changed.
Another country that is high on this issue is high on concerns about this issue, of course, is China. And what is your view of the China treaty with the U.S.? You think it's more than just stagecraft?
I can't wait to hear Ryan's opinion on this. My opinion is a layperson's opinion, quite frankly. I believe when two heads of state agree to something, something's going to happen. So I'm optimistic that we're searching for rules of engagement in cyberspace where the rules that we follow in the United States will also be followed in China. And the biggest change would be that there won't be intrusions for economic gain. I guess that means espionage is still fair game. And I don't know where that line between economic espionage and espionage are. But I'm thinking that when two heads of state make an agreement, there will be an agreement.
What do you think, Orion?
So I think you've got a very hungry country that can steal trillions of dollars of value with basic impunity, with no way for us to really exercise any kind of, rule of law against their action. And if I were the head of state in China, I'd probably be doing what they're doing today. And, the U.S. has worked very hard for the IP pool that we've built, and it's being absolutely pillaged right now. And we haven't shown any willingness to really put our foot down and cause a change in that dynamic. And until we do, I think we can agree to everything we want to. I don't think on the ground we're going to see a single change.
Well, all that said, though, you make the argument that it's really companies that become victims, not so much because of these sophisticated attackers that have to call Kevin, but for bad hygiene, that they can take care of themselves. Explain that.
So if you look at the attacks that we see thousands of them. I think, many of the companies that we're looking at, if you analyze how they got breached, it was a function of simple hygiene. So they didn't patch their machines, they didn't do disk encryption when they said they would, they didn't do multi-factor. And if you Google these words and you Google against the word breach, you're going to see which breaches I'm talking about. But
and which breaches would those be? Target?
Target is a great example of a breach that, had they instrumented what they have today, would have been much harder for it to have happened. And they've done a great job upgrading their security posture since then across hygiene and making sure that all these things that I'm talking about are being done. But if you look across the companies that have been successfully breached, many of them were breached because they didn't do the things that we all know they were supposed to have done. I was sitting with somebody recently and they asked me, what are the 5 things that we should really be doing in our environment? And I chuckled because I told him, I've been doing this for 15 years and the answer I'm going to give you is the same answer I would have given you 15 years ago. You have to patch your computers, you have to make sure that multi-factor is enabled, you have to know what's running in your environment and what you care about and where the data is. These are the same problems we've always had. And because people aren't doing that basic hygiene, because their tools are broken and their people don't have enough time, they're not able to protect the things they care about, and as a result of that, they're losing them.
What's your take on that, Kevin?
What's my take on that? Well, I'm probably going to veer in a different direction. I believe, first, just looking at the United States, we have to be careful. I think every time there's a victim company, the pendulum of public opinion will swing to you were irresponsible or you were a victim of a security breach. And I think we have to figure out what is the line we want to establish that's reasonable when it comes to securing our companies. We can't expect a media and entertainment company to withstand a cyber military attack. I don't think that's a reasonable bar.
You can use names, Kevin.
So,
it's okay.
I don't need to use names, right? But I
Sony,
think,
is that what we're talking about?
well, yeah, in the case of Sony, the President of the United States was nice enough to do attribution to say North Korea was behind the Sony breach. I don't think your organizations are going to have the President do attribution for you should you have a breach, but attribution like that can go a long way to...
It goes a long way towards protecting a company from potential liability. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I
Lawsuits?
think it goes a long way. Well, the plaintiff lawyers have certainly found cyberspace. There's no question about that. But I think that if you're breached and you know it, and there's attribution by the government that says it was a military behind it, I think that the pendulum of public opinion does swing to you're a victim rather than negligent or irresponsible. And I don't think as a country we figured out, by the way, or even as across the globe, we haven't figured out what is reasonable in cybersecurity. There is no due standard of care or duty of care that's been established for all industries. Some industries have them, but for most industries, you got to pick out a risk profile that you want to have and then implement that risk profile.
Before I swing it to the audience, Orion, talk about the fact we've heard so much on this stage, just in the short time we've had the sessions open, that about big data and about devices, proliferation of devices. Are we too narrow in thinking about cybersecurity when it just comes to computers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think many of our customers only after a breach understood that their point of sale devices or ATMs or heart rate monitors or CAT scanners or whatever it is that was breached were computers. And many of them are running Linux or Windows. You just can't see it the same way that you're used to when you see it on your PC. That's a huge problem because it turns out the vulnerabilities that exist in a regular Windows box will exist on an ATM. We just don't think of it the same way. And until people start actually considering them computers that have vulnerabilities that are just as serious that need to be fixed, we're going to keep on losing data through those vectors. So point of sale devices is a very common target. Why? Because people never really manage them the right way. And as a result of that, they're a really open target for people, and they happen to be transiting really important data, like credit card information, which a lot of people would love to be able to steal. So,
Give us another point of entry that you don't even think about, like, I don't know, cameras or anything else?
I mean, cameras in factories and in fulfillment centers are absolutely computers. Door locks, in many cases, are controlled by computers. You've got people who have robots that are going around in a factory that are moving around that are running basically a full operating system. And that's on the enterprise side. On the consumer side, I think a lot of people have been thinking about Fitbits and all these other devices that really are computers on our wrists. I mean, if you have an Apple Watch, you're wearing a computer that's a lot more powerful than the computer that was on your desk 10 years ago in a lot of ways. And yet, a lot of people don't realize that that thing can record your location, it can record your heartbeat, it's got all kinds of great data about you. And if it's not secure, that's a huge problem.
Questions? Anybody? Yes. Adam? This was supposed to be for CEOs to ask questions, Adam, but we'll let you do it.
Well, I'll go quickly then. Playing on that, what you just said about an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, what precautions should the average person take? Are you saying you won't wear one, or are you doing something to it after you buy it that we don't know about?
So I guess the way I would answer is I would want a company that takes security seriously, who created it, for it to be on my wrist. And so there are definitely companies, probably represented in this room, like Apple and Google, who have long histories of really strong security practices. If I was going to put something on my wrist, it would be something where I really trusted that they were thoughtful about that. I mean, I run effectively a company that's still a startup, and I know the pressure about getting something out on time. If you've got a company where it's existentially threatening if they don't release by Christmas, the easiest thing to cut is security, and it's also pretty problematic. And I would probably go for a company that didn't have that kind of pressure.
Since you guys both go into companies, I mean, part of what you have to do is be a hand holder for senior executives and CEOs once they've been broken in, or to, in your case, the correct hygiene. Kevin, when there is an attack, what are the rules of disclosure in your mind?
It varies. That's a great question, by the way, because that's when the CEO actually learns they've been breached, when there's a disclosure requirement, or even if there's not a disclosure requirement. Most CEOs, when they learn of a breach and they feel they want to control the dissemination of that information, they'll disclose anyway. So there's a lot of factors. Depends on industry, depends on what kind of data might have been impacted by it, depends on where you're at in an investigation. The unfortunate reality, when I look back at 2014, we responded to 226 security breaches, and almost no company got to disclose on their own terms when they did disclose. What that means is really the time frame got disrupted. Most companies had to disclose that they had a breach during what I call the fog of war, where they didn't quite know what had happened, and they had to kind of piecemeal some things and push them out just because they wanted to control the disclosure. But I think simple rules that you would do in any disclosure besides a breach would apply. Only disclose what you know, don't disclose what you don't know. A lot of times during the fog of war, the best thing you can do is not feel obligated to disclose any details till you know the details. But the list varies by industry, by risk.
But there's tremendous pressure to disclose.
Well, there's consumer protection laws that would suggest that you need to when certain data is lost. If you lose consumers' first name and last name in conjunction with state ID number, private account numbers, and things like that, you're compelled to disclose. I think the biggest cause of disclosure is most CEOs just think it's the right thing to do. I hate to say it. They just go, you know what? There's a chance that the hackers might have gotten a user account and passphrase for our consumers that log in. So let's not take that risk. Let's just disclose that and move out.
Any other questions right here? And if you could identify yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, and to say something else, if you lose IP, I'm not aware of any disclosure laws for losing intellectual property other than what you feel is the obligation to your shareholders if you're a private company.
Did you want to jump in?
One
Sorry.
thing there. I mean, there's actually tremendous pressure not to disclose, right? I mean, there's a huge amount of damage that gets caused to a company. I was talking to a CISO who moved out of one of the big banks, and they'd gotten breached after he moved out. And he was chuckling. He said, I don't even know why they disclose this information. It didn't raise to the bar that was necessary. And we had like 15 of those when I was a CISO, and I didn't have to disclose them, so I didn't. There's a huge amount of pressure not to disclose because you have to then explain how you're going to make it not happen again. And it turns out that's a lot of work.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah, Helmut Ludwig from Siemens. We talk very often about banking, credit cards, national security. But what do you recommend? And just 3 core priority recommendations for a CEO who's running a manufacturing company, designing products, manufacturing products, and has a big database of customer relationship. What are the 3 top areas you should focus on?
Very good question. Both.
Yeah, I'll give you my 3, and Orion will have a different 3. They'll both be the same level of importance. In the 226 breaches we responded to last year, the #1 way a company was broken in was spear phishing. So to be able to detect the breach when it occurs, first off, you got to shut the front door, and that's what I'm going to let him talk about. But the breaches that are successful, it's spear phishing. So I'd recommend have spear phishing detect that, because if you miss the first inning of a breach, and that's a baseball analogy, but if you miss the first phase of a breach, your efficacy to detect you've had a breach goes way down afterwards right now. That's first and foremost. Second, don't have an account that works everywhere. And there's a couple of companies that can help in that regard so that when the bad guys break in, if one person gets spearphished, then people can log in everywhere. So you got to be careful with that. So I call that credential management second. And third would be just protect what matters most, segment what matters the most.
So I'm always shocked by how many companies I go into and I ask the CIO basic questions like, how many computers do you have? And they'll tell me I have between 50 and 100,000 computers, right? They'll have no idea how many computers they have. Or which
And that's
ones
just
are
computers. That's not even the devices you were talking about.
They don't know which ones are critical. They don't know which ones house customer data. Or they have guesses, and those guesses are wrong. And so the first thing I would tell you is understand what you own, right? Where is it, what is it, and what's critical? The second thing I would tell you is everybody knows what you're supposed to be doing to have good hygiene. So patching your computers. I mean, Microsoft every month gives us a bunch of things we're supposed to do. Very few companies do a great job with that. If you're not doing a great job, you can forget about everything else you're doing. Because those critical vulnerabilities that you're not patching are root levels it weighs into every device that you own. And it just makes it too easy for the attacker to figure out how to get into your environment, patch the machines, do all the things you were supposed to do. Put antivirus, as ineffective as it is, put antivirus on every computer you have because you are mandated to do that in most industries and you should be doing it anyway. Just basic hygiene. And then the third thing is user education. I mean, there are a lot of users who don't understand how this happens. And it's not that hard to explain that if somebody sends you a picture of a cat and you're at work, don't click on the picture. You don't have to click on it right now, click on it at home. Give them basic user education so that they can figure out how to avoid a lot of the pain. And we'd love to make our users super smart, but it turns out that even if you give them basic education, they can improve their behavior.
Yes.
Nick Allen, Lenovo. I saw some stats that said that either now or quite soon, chief marketing officers have more IT spend in their budgets than CIOs do. And it seems that the cybersecurity issues are often because of how much sits outside the CIO's domain. And so I had kind of two questions following on from that. One is, are you seeing companies changing their structure to try and address the fact that they have that anomaly? Because you talk about talking to the CIO about how many computers he's got. It's because the marketing guys have got all the computers and they're not under his control. And then leading on to that, is it inevitable that companies are going to get hacked and it's therefore what you protect within your system rather than trying to stop anybody getting in, because people are going to get in? So it's kind of two questions. Are people changing their structures, and is the strategy protect what's inside, not stop people getting in?
So we've changed this in our industry relatively recently. In the last couple of years, people have started realizing that the truth is that they're being breached constantly. It's just a question of how painful it's going to be, right? So if you can segment your environment so that things that you really want to protect are separated from the massive environment that you've got, and you can be really deliberate about seeing who's accessing those things, you are going to get breached, and you can probably contain the breach to things you don't care as much about. I think that the fact that the CMO is getting involved with IT, and so just to answer your question, yes, you are being breached. Yes, you do have to move from a protect-only mode to detect and respond as well. There's no way around that, and I think that's a realization that most people are now really coming to. The CMO and the CIO and kind of the fungibility between them, I don't actually think is what's driving the lack of data. I think what's driving the lack of data is if you go to most of the environments in this room, they're using 25-year-old tools to manage their environments. So there's one from Microsoft, there's one from CA, there's one from IBM. I actually sold IBM my last company. That's the company that they're using now. But these are 18, 20, 25-year-old tools that are built in a world where the cloud didn't exist, virtualization didn't exist, mobility didn't exist. And you're trying to make those tools work. I mean, when Microsoft's tool was invented that does this, a big network was 5,000 computers. A big network today is 750,000 computers. It's no shock that those tools don't work anymore. And I actually don't think that moving between the CIO and the CMO and who owns the budget is the problem. I think the problem is people are still trying to screw in screws with a hammer, and their hands are bloody because they're using the wrong tools.
Yeah, my response to that, a lot of CEOs sometimes will start debating who should security bubble up to. It is my opinion, actually doesn't matter. It matters where you have one throat to choke and that person can get the job done. In most organizations, and it does depend on industry, sometimes there's a risk officer that runs security. Sometimes, a lot of times in the banking communities, you'll see a CFO running it because they have a compliance driver behind the financial services. But at the end of the day, it actually, I've seen it shift and shift back at companies as they go along their security maturity continuum. Ultimately, it just needs to be reporting to someone who gets the job done if you take security seriously. So the board chooses the risk profile that the operational managers need to implement, and we just got to figure out how to, what structure is going to work best at your organization to meet that risk profile.
So looking beyond an individual company's own vulnerability, what about a broader attack, a public attack, so to speak, on a power grid? Power goes down in San Francisco for a week. How can companies plan for that? Do you ever talk to them about that?
I think one of the neatest drills you can do, but I don't know if I'd recommend doing it, is just come off the internet for like 3 hours at your company and see what happens. Every once in a while, a company has to do that under duress. And all of a sudden, you start realizing, wow, the gate doesn't go up to let cars in the parking garage. Wow, we can't buy lunch today because we can't get a credit card transaction in the lunchroom. It will astonish you how much your business can grind to a halt just uncorking from the internet. So it could be a good drill once a year when it has no business impact to maybe check out what are the repercussions to coming off the grid. And that's just the internet. Now you're talking electricity. I'm not sure you want to simulate that one.
There have been a number of companies that have gotten to the point where they were writing paper checks for weeks because of a cyber breach. And I think we've both been inside after that happened in the look of just absolute shock. Because apparently companies knew how to run this way 40 years ago. They don't know how to run that way anymore. And so the answer is there's no way to mitigate the power going out or the internet going out or some of these really crisis situations that are external to your org. And one of the things that I'm amazed by is that we've only had a handful of events where destruction was actually the intent.
Right.
Typically, it's data theft. If it turns toward destruction, which I think a lot of people in cyber are really scared of, that's going to be a completely different story because as much as they'd love to pretend that everything's hunky-dory, SCADA environments, the power grid as an example, are not very well prepared in some cases. And many of the things we're relying on a daily basis aren't as well prepared as they should be. And we're racing, and I think both companies are doing this to try and get as many people educated as possible before it becomes an existential threat. But it is a real threat.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
Peter Anonymous from Switzerland. It seems, at least from the press, that about 50% of all healthcare files have been hacked in the US, at least from the outside, and I'm not a security guru. So going forward, once they have hacked these files, we all know that they will have, a lot of reusability of that data. So I read the other day in Wall Street Journal that they had compared the Chinese of government officials, non-government officials, so this way they will find out who are actually security agents of the government through the medical file system that they have hacked. So how would you see that going forward? Because once they have that data, they have free access.
I don't know if they have free access, but how would I answer this? Is hacking healthcare fair game for espionage? I don't know. So our healthcare organizations are going to have to play goalie, and they're going to have to be really good at it when it comes to cybersecurity.
And which raises the OPM break into, where you're going to have, as you said, potential blackmail 20 years down the line. We have to finish up, but Kevin, Orion, thank you so much. It's terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
A lot of takeaways.